BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, German animal products continued to enter the UK after an import ban was put in place because of the foot and mouth outbreak there.
I was getting calls from inland authorities saying, hang on a minute, I've just got some German whey product turning up. What do I do with it?
British egg producers tell us they want their chickens ordered inside to protect them from bird flu.
Farmers are very concerned that should be taken into consideration when a decision is made to house birds or not house birds.
And the new president of NFUS Scotland on his biggest challenge.
We need to take Westminster government to task as regards inheritance tax. Total lack of understanding the impact it would have.
But let's start with tenant farmers, which is the topic we featured all week on Farming Today. That's the programme which goes out every weekday morning here on BBC Radio 4 at 5:45 and is available at more social hours via BBC Sounds. We looked at all aspects of renting farmland, including one of the country's biggest landlords, the Crown Estate, which has a new rural strategy and a new approach to farmland. It rents out 185,000 acres of farm and common land in England and Wales. Its profits go to the Treasury and around 25% of those get passed on to the King. Well, as part of the estate's new approach, tenants are being offered new environmental farm business tenancies, or green leases, as Rebecca Rooney reports.
We have a herd of about 600 to 800 Sussex suckler cows, with all the organic beef going into the Windsor farm shop.
The beef herd at Windsor is just a small part of the Crown Estate's business. It's landlord to more than 300 tenant farmers. Those tenants are being offered a new kind of lease. It's longer, 15 years instead of the usual 3 or 4, and each tenant farm will have an individual environmental plan. Paul Sedgwick is Deputy Ranger at Windsor and Director of Rural for the Crown Estate.
What we've done is we've sought within our environmental farm business tenancy, which we've drafted, or sort of green lease, as perhaps you might call it, to enable them to produce food, enable them to support the environment, but to make sure that the work they do on the environment is properly remunerated. And in our case, we've taken a view across the organisation to lower rents on land that is going into nature recovery. That, I think, has been well received. I think some farmers were a little suspicious at the outset as to why the landlord was wanting to lower rents. But, we have to realise we're all in it together.
The Crown Estate set up a £20 million rural environment fund. Tenants can apply for money to help pay for nature restoration, things like planting hedges or restoring ponds.
We've asked our farmers to put up to 15% of their farms into nature recovery where appropriate, because obviously on grade 1 and grade 2 high quality land, that's much better for food production. We need to make all these businesses fit for the future around creating income stacking on their farms, so that they're not reliant on BPS, the Basic Payment Scheme subsidy, which is being phased out, primary crop production, but also they've got diversified income streams in the broadest sense, whether that be converting an old tractor shed to a commercial storage unit, or tapping into emerging markets.
Simon Phillips farms 500 acres of arable for the Crown at Bingham in Nottinghamshire. He's one of the first to sign up to the environmental farm business tenancy.
When you initially think about it, 500 acre farm, 15%, 75 acre to take out, it was quite daunting. But there's been a lot of give and take. We've worked between us to come up with the end game. And yes, we've taken land out of production, but it's bits and pieces that we're happy to take out of production, and the Crown are happy that those bits can be used for tree planting and hedge planting. So it works for both parties.
The Queen, I think, set up the herd. It is now the biggest herd of Sussex cattle in the UK.
Paul Sedgwick again. Even if you're a very successful tenant farmer, you must feel like all the power lies with your landlord. How do you kind of, make it truly a partnership?
I think that will take time to build up trust between both parties. Historically, the Crown's relationship with its rural land it's fallen in and out of love over the years with its land for different strategic reasons. But our board of commissioners are really, really engaged with our rural estates, and I hope that over time people will see that we're trying to do the right thing. Initial signs are really positive. I think with all these new schemes there will inevitably be nervousness and course correction as we go along.
Paul Sedgwick there from the Crown Estate. British egg producers want the government to order all free-range chickens inside to protect them from bird flu. The British Free-Range Egg Producers Association has told Farming Today that with rising numbers of cases of the virus, it's time to protect the national flock. Overall, levels of the virus haven't yet reached the peak of recent years, but stricter biosecurity measures have been brought in for poultry keepers across Great Britain. And there are housing orders in place where outbreaks have taken place across much of eastern England and part of Shropshire, where all birds must be kept indoors, including backyard flocks. Gary Ford, policy advisor at the British Free Range Egg Producers Association, told me it's time to make that countrywide.
It's very concerning. Whilst we've had avian influenza for a number of winters now, after 28 cases this winter, farmers are very concerned about the risk to their own business.
And that's why you're calling now for all birds to be ordered in.
We are indeed. Currently, there are a number of counties in England that have a housing order in place, but we would like that extended across GB, and indeed that is what we're calling for.
There's nothing stopping farmers bringing their own birds in, though, is there?
True, they can do it voluntarily. However, they cannot market their eggs as free range, so they will lose that free range status, and that has significant implications financially for their business.
How much would it cost them?
It would impact on the price that they receive for their egg. They would have to be marketed as barns, so it could be a significant price reduction.
The government would say, though, surely they have to have an evidence-based approach to bring in a housing order.
We totally understand that and accept that. Our position is that evidence shouldn't be the be-all and end-all. It should help guide and shape a policy, but other factors should be taken into consideration. And one of those factors is the impact on farmers. Farmers are very concerned. So I believe that should be taken into consideration when a decision is made whether to house birds or not house birds.
So the rules have recently changed, haven't they? Because in the past, they could have been in for 16 weeks. Now, those birds could be brought in indefinitely and still count as free range if the government orders it.
That is correct. That is the situation. In the past, it has been a concern, it has been a factor, but that is no longer the case. So we're really pleased that the government have removed that 16-week period.
Consumers, though, would be right to feel a little bit hard done by, wouldn't they? Because once you've brought those birds in, for whatever reason, they're not free-range eggs.
I believe consumers understand the reason, the rationale behind it, and it is to protect the welfare of our free-range laying hens.
Given the number of cases of bird flu we've seen over a number of years now, how do you see the future for free-range eggs?
We've had avian influenza for the last 10 winters, so it is something to a degree poultry farmers are getting used to. It doesn't lessen the worry, and it may cause some of them to leave the industry if they deem the risk is just too high.
Because the obvious answer is simply to keep birds inside.
It's either to keep birds inside, which is what we're calling for, or to simply not stock the sheds when they become empty. So rather than replace the flock with a new flock of laying hens, just to simply keep the shed empty, which is no good for self-sufficiency, production of homegrown eggs. It doesn't do anything for UK production if sheds are left empty.
Gary Ford. DEFRA told us they know the devastating impact bird flu has and keep housing measures under constant review. Now, silage, which is the preserved chopped grass or other crops that farmers feed to livestock throughout the winter. The more good quality silage you can harvest and store yourself, the less money you need to spend on bought-in feed. There is also a real pride in producing a great crop of silage. Well, the Westmorland Agricultural Society runs an annual, hotly contested silage competition. The entries are lab analysed, and the best 4 farms in each category get a personal visit from the judge. Kaz Graham ventured into a Lancashire silage pit to find out more.
Yeah, so basically, this is corn on the cob. It's your cornflakes. It's what humans eat.
Maize silage?
Yes.
I've not come across this before.
Right, it's fantastic feed. We feed this for the starch. We feed this for the pH, the dry matter.
I'm with Chris Hallhead on his farm just to the north of Lancaster. And so the silage clamp, that's what we're looking at.
Yep.
Basically, you've got the whole lower part of this barn filled with this very, very finely chopped maize. And that's the maize, it's like the whole kind of corn
plant
on the cob and all of the stem as well, all very, very finely chopped.
Everything goes in.
And we've got maybe about 7-8 foot of it. Then on top of it, there's plastic that's keeping it dry, but also helping it ferment a little bit.
Exactly, yes. And if we'd had a good summer last summer, we'd have been looking at a higher crop even still, another 2 foot on top maybe. But last year was just as bad as it could get, really. Yeah. But it did well considering.
And what does this crop feed?
We've got 125 milk cows in the herd, 330 cattle on altogether. We rear everything. I'm the 5th generation here since 1914. And it's a good farm.
And you must be pretty pleased with this crop because, let's face it, you wouldn't have entered it for the silage competition otherwise.
No, we are pleased with it. It's sampled well, it's feeding well. The cows will tell you the story.
The cows will tell us a story.
They do.
In the milk, yeah?
Oh yes, everything. Condition, fertility, milk. It's feeding as it should.
Right,
yep.
Well, Mike Taylor is here today too. He is the man you have to impress. Will he be as impressed as the cows are, I wonder? Mike, hello.
Well, this is all analysed in the laboratory. That doesn't lie, and then we know where we're at. I'm here to see the condition of the pit and the amount of wastage, if there is any, and everything's tickety-boo.
And how important is the way that it is stored?
Well, it costs a fortune to grow, and you don't want to waste it. That's the point. So, yes. If you make marmalade, you don't leave the jam jars lids off, do you?
You don't. That's a very good point. And how much can you tell about a silage by looking at it? I mean, you're just pulling a wedge of it out here and sniffing it, the smell.
It's got a vinegary, acidic-y smell with it. That's what it's preserved in. It's lactic acid. We'll have a look and see that it's all nicely chopped. See how many grains there are in it relative to the stem and the stalk. And then we make a judgment on it.
David Galbraith is the steward of this competition. David, how many entries have you got this year? And how competitive does it get?
It's very competitive. There's 80 entries from 53 farms. The competition's been running for like 30 odd years, but some years we have good years and some years we have bad years. It's just a good way of farmers getting a chance to compare their forage with everybody else's, and probably more importantly, after the competition we have a nice social evening where everybody gets together for the results.
So, Chris, your silage this year, it's looking good. The judge didn't raise his eyebrows in horror, so that's a good sign, isn't it?
I can't see much wrong with it this year. It's nice to enter the competition. It's nice to get through to the last 4. If we don't win, we don't win. But it just shows that we have got a good crop.
Well, Mike, this is the very first farm that you've visited in this year's competition. You can't do any comparisons, but do you think it might be in with a chance?
Well, he's listening, so I've got to say yes.
And he wasn't just being tactful there. Chris did, in fact, win Best Maize Silage. The new president of NFU Scotland says changing the union's culture will take time. It comes after an internal report presented to this week's conference said leaders need to be more effective in calling out sexist, racist and homophobic language. The union has accepted all 14 recommendations made in that report. Well, agricultural policy and inheritance tax were also discussed at the meeting. BBC Scotland's Rural Affairs correspondent Kevin Keane was there and first asked delegates how they see the future for Scottish farming.
One thing that I see in Scotland, which is a big problem, is the fact that younger people find it almost impossible to get into the industry. Farmland is so expensive, no young person can basically buy land and make it work with the returns that come from farming.
I think the changes with the budget have been really impactful in the industry, and I think certainly in terms of well-being, I think it's had a really big impact on just the feeling and the value that people are putting on themselves. However, I do think today's conference has really highlighted that there are so many opportunities and there's a lot to be optimistic about.
The future it will be good for people, but I think there are going to have to be people who are prepared to change and innovate, gene editing and things like that.
We have so much potential to deliver as an industry for the environment and for our local communities. So yeah, I remain always optimistic and always try and see the glass half full.
Delegates at the NFU Scotland conference there, which also heard this internal report on diversity and inclusion, which I suspect, Kevin, made hard reading for union leaders.
Yeah, indeed. Now, this is a report that is designed to really address the lack of diversity at kind of boardroom level at NFU Scotland. So the current board is entirely male, and there's a bit of a recognition that the union itself needs to do more to try to attract people into some of those positions from a more diverse background. So they've carried out this review. They've been speaking to some of the nearly 9,000 members of the union right across the country. And what this report says is that farming leaders need to do more, calling out sexist, racist and homophobic language from members, amongst other things. And it says that some inappropriate comments are going unchallenged in meetings, for example. And one example of that includes members suggesting that the only good thing about Nicola Sturgeon are, quote, her legs. It also said that gender stereotypes were being reinforced by some members as well, by suggesting that members who are farmers should bring their wives to the annual conference here in Glasgow because, again, quote, the shopping is great. And it also said that some of the comments that were reported during this investigation could even be considered as sexual harassment and even serious enough as to warrant a discrimination case against NFU Scotland. So it is a significant issue for the union. They say that they accept all 14 recommendations that are made in this internal report, and they say that they've put it out there to be kind of open and honest and start a conversation, and they say that they'll now be monitoring progress in this area every 6 months.
Well, away from that, the Scotland Office Minister, Kirsty McNeill, addressed the conference. She talked about inheritance tax. How did that go down?
Yeah, indeed. Well, it was a respectful exchange, I would say, and I think that there was some acknowledgement in the room that the Minister had come to the conference to face down what was obviously going to be a very angry set of people. But I'd say that those farmers did still manage to make their anger clear to the Minister. Now, Kirsty McNeill promised to ask the Treasury for a meeting with the industry's representatives of all 4 nations who've become, frankly, quite frustrated that they've not been able to get around the table with the Treasury. But I don't think that there was ever going to be a chance that she'd kind of come here and announce a change in the policy. I think there was an acceptance of that here. Nevertheless, it is pretty clear when you speak to farmers at the conference that the level of anger coming from them is just in no way subsiding.
Kevin Keane. Well, as I say, NFU Scotland elected a new president at the conference. He is Andrew Connon, who farms beef, sheep and arable in Aberdeenshire. He's been a vice president since 2021. He told me it's clear what his biggest challenge is.
I think the biggest issue at the moment is that we need to take Westminster government to task as regards inheritance tax. We need to get the UK government across the table and start to discuss this with immediate effect.
You heard from a Scottish Office Minister at your conference. We've spoken a lot to DEFRA ministers. There doesn't seem to be any movement at all on this issue. They think it is fair and they need the money.
They certainly need the money. I would acknowledge they do need the money, but there's a total lack of understanding the impact it would have, a massive impact, detrimental effect for next generation of farmers going forward, and they need to have a rethink.
Now, at your conference this week, there was a pretty damning internal report on outdated attitudes and language. How are you going to change that culture in the union?
Whatever we do, we need to be achievable, but we want to be embracing as a union. We want to increase diversity. We want to get more ladies involved in our union, and people of all ages, and get young people to start coming to be involved.
Will that, though, do you think, mean that you have to change the image that many women and younger people have of your union currently?
I struggle to say that. I mean, the perceptions can vary from one individual to another. We're already very engaging. We're encouraging anyone and everyone to be involved in our union, come to meetings and come through the ranks. But we'll work hard to try and get more young people and a diverse, or obviously more ladies as well. But that doesn't happen overnight. So that you'll never just rectify things like that overnight. It's a long-term game.
Andrew Connon. Animal products from Germany were still getting into the UK days after the government banned imports in response to cases of foot and mouth there. Well, that's according to evidence given to the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee of MPs this week, as they started a new inquiry into animal and plant diseases. In the first session, MPs were looking at biosecurity and in particular the border checks done on goods coming into the UK. Heather Simons has more details.
Much of this first session focused on illegal meat that's being brought into the UK under the guise of personal imports. Now, when I say illegal meat, that's meat that's often not gone through checks to confirm it's disease-free and conforms to UK health standards. And it can be a biosecurity risk if, for example, it comes from an area where there's a disease like African swine fever, which could then be spread to the UK. Lucy Manzano from the Dover Port Health Authority told the committee the problem is growing.
We're seeing vehicles that have been adapted, or coaches without passengers, as a simple example, that are full of products of animal origin. I mean, really quite startling.
Almost 100 tonnes of illegal meat was seized at the Port of Dover last year. Lucy Manzano says they're checking vehicles coming off passenger ferries.
We are looking at this food on those live tourist lanes that you would have all travelled through when you've done your holiday. They were not designed to be pulling out huge tonnes of bloody, wet, dirty meat that cannot be contained or washed down.
What about the border force here? Where does that come in?
Well, the committee was told that applying controls on personal imports is a role for the border force, but port health authorities are sometimes given extra funding from DEFRA to work alongside them. And Helen Buckingham, a chartered environmental health practitioner, told the committee that in her experience, the border force aren't conducting searches for personal imports, and criminals often aren't being prosecuted.
Even where Border Force have permanent teams in situ, they don't, of their own volition, go and look for food. If they find illegal personal food, it's a happy accident. It's not something that they go and look for. Secondly, Chair, you mentioned about a deterrent. It's also my understanding that most of this stuff is just taken away as voluntary surrender. So yes, the importer, the criminal in this case, has lost the value of their consignment. But no, there's no punishment because the legislation is a bit confusing and difficult in this space.
I did put this to the Home Office, which said the Border Force ensure all goods brought into the UK by passengers are appropriately declared and abide by customs and excise rules.
Where's all this meat going then?
Well, the committee heard evidence that illegal meat is being sold in plain view on high streets in the UK, with consumers often unaware of what they're buying. Some of it is being picked up inland. Helen Buckingham gave this example of illegal meat being found almost by accident, it seems.
It wasn't that long ago, we had DVLA pulled over a vehicle for a licensing issue, opened the back to have a look, and there it was, chocked full. Even had a till and weighing scales. So masquerading as personal, but clearly not.
Heather, what does all this mean for biosecurity when we've got something like foot and mouth in Germany?
Well, that was mentioned. And Helen Buckingham said that although the government banned the import of animal products from Germany to try and stop the disease spreading to the UK, systems took several days to be updated. And in that time, some animal products were getting through.
I was getting calls from inland authorities saying, hang on a minute, I've just got some German whey product turning up. What do I do with it? And I think that really opened the doors to the vulnerable state we've got because we've not got enough clear communication coming down the pipe from central government about what to do. The guidance, my BCP colleagues will tell you that the guidance about what to do and how to deal with this stuff didn't come through quick enough.
I asked DEFRA about it, and they told me the government will do whatever it takes to protect our nation's farmers from the risk posed by foot and mouth disease. That is why restrictions were immediately brought in on animal products from Germany to prevent an outbreak. The statement goes on, robust biosecurity controls were implemented at pace following confirmation of the outbreak.
Heather Simons there. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.